Thank you for joining our virtual campus history tour. This is a modified version of what would happen in a normal homecoming where we would move around the campus to see various sites. But through the magic of the internet, we're able to do this virtually. My name is Peter Van Houten, and I'm so glad that you come along and see these sites and meet some interesting people out of Berkeley's past. Now, some of these people were born about 200 years ago, but as I said, through the magic of the internet and through the magic of Mark Maffio of the Rally Committee, who is handling the technical aspect of this, you're able to see these sites and meet these people. So let's take now a quick look at the timeline for the period we're going to be concerned with. If we can see the timeline now at whenever, there we go. And just take a look. We're starting with 1849, and we're going to move up through the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, and to the turn of the century. Then we'll have a few more modern episodes near the end of our tour. So we're going now to meet someone who will take us through the first stages of this tour. So we're going to move right now to Monterey, California in 1849, and our first scene will be Colton Hall. Now, we'll meet our tour guide right away. My name is Samuel Willey. I am the Reverend Samuel Hopkins Willey. I'm a graduate of Dartmouth College, and I was sent to California in 1849, right in the middle of the gold rush, to form a church. I got to Monterey after a long sea voyage down from New York to Panama. I crossed the Isthmus of Panama. Oh goodness, it was full of sickness and disease, but I made it and got to Monterey. But lo and behold, when I got there, I found most of the men already in the mines, and the women and children who were left were mostly Catholics from Mexico. And this wasn't very promising for me as a Protestant minister. But I stayed on and became one of the chaplains at California's first constitutional convention. Now remember, this is 1849, before California became a state. I used my access to the delegates to help them and encourage them to provide for a future university. And we'll see in our next slide what that looked like. This is Article 9, Section 4 of the Constitution of 1849. So it provided for the safeguarding of any funds or lands that would be given for a future university. So this really, the university got its foot in the door right from the start. And so we were successful in this endeavor. So after the convention, I went on to San Francisco and I founded a church. And there in 1853, excuse me, 1853, a man knocked on my door and introduced himself as the Reverend Henry Durant. Now we're going to see a picture of Henry here, and along with a picture of me. Henry's on the right, and I'm on the left. And we became a team that worked together for many, many years until Henry's death. He indicated that he was a graduate of Yale, of the class of 1827, and he had really come to California with the hope of founding a college. And we really had college on our brain. But before we could have a college, we had to have students. There wouldn't be a public high school in California until 1856. That's 3 years later. So we started in Oakland a Contra Costa Academy, a preparatory school. And there is a picture of it there in the middle underneath my picture. And we were able to start and get a college going. Money was always a problem. This was the wild. Here's some more scenes of the college. Um, Money was always a problem. Though this was the wild, wild west. In San Francisco, the vigilantes administered justice at the end of a rope. In Oakland, Broadway was just a wide road leading from the bay up to the hills. And Reverend Durant spent much of his time out trying to raise money. So, but we carried on, and in 1855, we were able to found our college on the site there where the academy it was also being held. In 1860, the trustees of the college were out in an area in north of Oakland surveying land that we had purchased in hopes of where we would build our future college. And the land, as we looked down from the hills to the bay, it was wide open spaces, just a few isolated outcroppings of buildings. And someone recited a poem of westward the course of empire takes its way. The first 4 acts already past. The 5th shall close the drama of the day. Time's noblest offspring is the last. Someone said, where did that come from? And they said, that's from the Reverend, the Bishop Berkeley, an English-Irish bishop. The name is pronounced Barclay, but was spelled like Berkeley. And so that was the origin of the name of the area where our new college was to be built. In 1862, Congress passed, and there is a picture. Before we go on to the next one, there's a picture of the monument dedicated where we dedicated this future college site. And today, this is really at the corner of Gailey Road and Hearst Avenue in Berkeley. So, but in 1862, right in the middle of the Civil War, Congress passed what was called the Morrill Land Grant Act. This was introduced by Senator Justin Morrill of Vermont, and it basically gave land to each state that the states could sell to support a college. And you see there the objectives to, without excluding other scientific and classical studies, and include military tactics. Now, the military tactics were put in there because they realized that right in the middle of the Civil War, they could have used all the military training that they could have gotten. So they were going to also teach agriculture and the mechanic arts. Now we're going to come back to this a little bit later in the purposes of the act. But this turned out to be one of the more foresighted pieces of legislation that the United States Congress has ever instituted. In 1866, the state legislature passed an act to create a what was called the Agriculture, Mining, and Mechanical Arts College. This was really just to meet the provisions of the Morrill Act so that the state wouldn't lose the land that the Morrill Act was going to provide. At an event at the college in 1867, was attended by the governor of the state, Governor Low, and he said to me, here you have a college, You have a faculty, you have students, you have a library, you have a tradition, but you don't have any money. And it's really too bad that we, the state, we don't have anything which you have, but we do have money from the sale of land from the land grant. And it's too bad we couldn't come together and form a real university. And in making a long story short, we did just that. One of our trustees of the College of California, John W. Dwinell, um, introduced a bill in the legislature. He was elected to the legislature really for the purpose of doing that. And uh, this bill was later passed and became what was called the Organic Act. This was the act to create and organize the University of California. And this is, we celebrate every year on that date. And Mr. Dwinell and Reverend Durant have buildings on the campus named in their honor. Now, the College of California uh, uh, taught the first year of the university existence because the university wasn't ready to offer that instruction. So the college was kind enough to continue in operation for one more year before they disbanded. The first student who was enrolled was a man named James Wetmore. And I can still remember Professor LeConte registering him, saying, "Mr. Wetmore, it is a distinct honor to be the first to register at an institution that is destined to become one of the great ones in the country." How profound that was. The next year, in 1870, women were selected and admitted to the university, and this was something that was quite unusual for many colleges of the day. It wasn't for many years that co-ed education was practiced to any extent. So, but right from the earliest days, women were admitted. Now, in 1872, the university acquired a new president, and his name was Daniel Coit Gilman. And Gilman uh, had come from Yale. He had been connected with the Sheffield Scientific School there, and he'd also been very involved with uh, education in the public schools in New Haven, and had traveled through Europe examining and testing out various educational schemes, and really came with a great fund of knowledge about um, about education. And in his inaugural address, which we're going to see next, he set forth what he thought this new university should be, and this really set the university on its way. And this may be a little hard for you to read, but he said basically that it was a university we were going to have, not a high school, not a college, not an academy of science, nor an industrial school. He said that we might have some elements of those things, but it was going to be much more comprehensive than that. And it was going to be an institution that had two purposes. One was to diffuse knowledge, that's teach, to diffuse knowledge. And the second one was to promote knowledge, and that means to do research. This was quite different than many colleges of the day that were really only into the matter of teaching. And as the 19th century went on, more and more colleges and universities uh, began to adopt the German model of higher education, where research became an integral part of these institutions. But this, again, was at this time was new in much of the United States. Okay, the second item he indicated that this is going to be an institution for the state of California. It had to meet the state's needs, and these two objectives, these two pillars were the foundation that upon which the university was built. And we were so uh, lucky to have Gilman with us. While he was here, his first couple of years were very productive. Um, he was able to acquire a large gift that became the Lick Observatory near San Jose. He was able to get some endowed faculty chairs. He established goodwill in the community, and things were really on their way. But we'll hear more about some of the problems that were soon encountered in our next segment. And so I'm going to say goodbye now and turn you over to Martin Kellogg and let him take you the rest of the way. But before I go, may I extend my blessings on the University of California and wish you all well. All right, my name is Martin Kellogg, and I was one of the original faculty members on the Berkeley campus. And actually, I had been with the College of California and was really the only one from the faculty of the College of California that then went on to become a member of the faculty of the university. I taught ancient languages, and during my years at Berkeley, my long years at Berkeley, I was the dean of the faculty, and I was acting president for 3 years, and then I was the permanent president for 6 years. So I had a long time of service to the university. You might be interested to know that in those early days, a professor made between $200 and $300 a month. Now, this picture that you're seeing shows Berkeley in 1873. The campus moved out from Oakland to Berkeley, and in the spring of 1873, we had our first commencement there, and people came to the graduation. Some walked, some came on horseback, some came in buggies, and but we had our first commencement there. And in that commencement, we had 12 graduates. And our next slide is going to show what those people look like down at the bottom there. These were called the 12 disciples, and many of them went on to important roles in California's history. Now, let's just go back back to the slide showing the what Berkeley looked like, what the campus looked like, because I wanted you to see the background and notice how sparsely covered it is with buildings. And so the students and faculty who came to Berkeley in 1873 to begin their classes and to live there found the wide open spaces. Mail was delivered, addressed to Berkeley near Oakland, and there wouldn't be a post office in Oakland until 1870, or in Berkeley until 1878. Students and faculty commuted from Oakland and San Francisco. We'll see in a minute, we'll see a horse car that brought people. But again, just look at the background and see how sparsely settled Berkeley was. The university's Organic Act had said that there would be no dormitories, because dormitories were at the time, some people thought they were just incubators of mischief. And so as a result, people had to find housing wherever they could. Some people moved to Berkeley, some families moved to Berkeley. The father would work in Oakland or San Francisco, the mother would take in boarders, and people did all kinds of things. So eating and sleeping were real problems in those days. Now, students paid of $20 for an entry fee, and then $20 for each of three terms. So in the second year, all that tuition was done away with. Now, in our next slide, we're going to see, we'll see some pictures. Well, there's South Hall again, the first building, and as we all know, it still exists on the campus. And in our next slide, we're going to see here's the down at the bottom, the trolley car, the horse-drawn trolley car that brought people to Berkeley, and then a train that followed along some years later along Telegraph Avenue. In our next slide, we're going to see um, uh, several fraternity houses. Again, fraternities grew up because there wasn't any housing. The university basically felt housing and anything else where students ate, slept, so on and so forth, was not the university's problem. In our next slide, we're going to see some scenes. Here's an early classroom scene, men and women. Looks like some kind of a science class. And then down at the bottom, we have the early beginnings of some physical education instruction. The campus was pretty much organized, the student body was pretty much organized around the classes, freshman class, sophomore class, etc. And these classes had their own activities, glee clubs, debating societies, and so on and so forth. And it's interesting that in those early days, debate was really a very, very important thing. And people would come from miles around to attend debates. An agreement was signed between Stanford and Cal for a debate competition. To say debate was a big issue. They had glee clubs and songs, and some of the songs, Nellie and the Sing Nellie Home, Bullfrog on the Bank, Solomon Levy. These were some of the primitive songs that the students sang in those days. One of the activities that got going early on, began the competition between the classes. So at the beginning of the year, every year, the men of the freshman sophomore class had something called the rush. And in that, the idea was to tie up all the members of the other class. And this, as you can imagine, got very, very rough. And we on the faculty tried to stop it, but we just couldn't. And this went on for many a year. Now, another strange tradition of the students that would go on to our next slide. This was something called Burial of Burden and Minto. Burial of Burden and Minto. The freshmen had a required math book and a required English book. And at the end of the year, they had the tradition of burning these books. And they would dress up in sheets and have a solemn procession onto the campus where they would burn these books and bury them. Now, of course, the sophomores had to try to break up these celebrations. And they often turned quite into rough houses, people getting hurt. And but these traditions, one of the strangest traditions I think we can imagine, went on for a number of years. In our next slide, we'll see another picture of the at the top there, the program for this celebration, and the picture in the middle shows the freshmen getting ready for the celebration. And at the bottom, we see These are the seniors. These are the seniors gathering. Again, illustrating um, the class organization. Um, our next slide is going to show us um, the picture at the bottom shows the way delinquency notice, academic delinquency notices were provided. Now, this was not done with confidentiality thing, but these notices were pinned on the bulletin board uh, in North Hall, uh, and you can this man he was called the Angel of Death because he was posting notices about people being in academic difficulty. At the top, we see a group of men in their plug hats. It became a tradition that the juniors had this plug hat. They had uh, their fraternity symbols on it, other symbols, their class symbol on it, and I think they sat on them quite regularly to squash them. Now the picture right below it shows the seniors, and they had a more dignified hat, in keeping with the dignity of the senior class, who in those days were the uh, designated leaders of the campus. Uh, so again, the class structure was very important in these early days. So our next picture is going to show us um, a Hillgard Hall. Now, um, this this Hillgard Hall really illustrates some of the problems that I mentioned came about in the 1870s. Um, President Gilman had to deal with controversies over what was the proper role of the teaching of agriculture and the mechanic arts in the university. There were many people, particularly in the rural areas of the state, and again, in those days, a large portion of the state was rural. They believed that the university's function was to teach practical agriculture. That meant things like plowing, harvesting, and blacksmithing, and practical things like that. And it was not to teach what they called kid glove subjects like philosophy and so on and so forth. In the state legislature during the 70s, there were bills introduced to change the organization of the university, to do away with the regions and put a board of education, really, in charge of the university, with the sole purpose of converting its purposes into the teaching of practical agriculture and mechanic arts. So all during the 70s, these bills were introduced, and the university held its breath as to what would happen. Now, Hillgard, this building, is named after Eugene Voldemar Hillgard. He became the university's second professor of agriculture. Now, unlike the first professor, a man named Ezra Carr, Hillgard was a real soil scientist. And he had done important studies in the Mississippi Valley, and he'd come from the University of Michigan. And as I say, he was really a soil scientist, whereas Ezra Carr was a physician by training with nothing really of a scientific background, and but he had a political base with the rural areas of the state, particularly the State Grange. And so poor President Gilman, he wrote letters to the presidents of other colleges, like the president of Cornell, saying, "Oh my goodness, if we only had a firm constitutional basis like you do at Cornell, we'd be better off. Here we're based on this organic act that can be overthrown by any session of the legislature, and we don't have stability, and this is going to hurt us. Well, Hilgard came and became the professor of agriculture. Before long, he was able to show that he really could do something for the farmers. And there was the story told that at a meeting of the state Grange, Hilgard was the speaker, and he was outlining some of the things he was doing and studies he had done and so on and so forth. And one of the leaders of the Grange was overheard saying, "My God, the man knows something." And so uh, over the years, while the College of Agriculture didn't have many students, Hilgard's work with the farmers proved very, very valuable and won many friends to the university. And this became very, very important in the late 1870s, where California held its second constitutional convention. And into that constitution, the university was able, uh, at the last minute, to get a provision into the constitution that gave the regents a strong and firm foundation. It set the university on a solid foundation and is generally thought to be one of the reasons why the University of California has become great, because it has not been subject to the political pressures that existed in so many other states. And it's generally felt that a lot of the success that the university had in that convention came because of Professor Hilgard's work with the farmers, because it turned out in the voting on the Constitution, the rural areas of the state gave it a strong vote of confidence. Well, I'm going to say goodbye to you now, and I'm going to turn the uh, tour over to Professor Gailey, and he'll introduce himself and take you the rest of, of the way. So my name is Professor Charles Mills Gailey, and before we let Professor Kellogg get off too far off, I want to thank him for his long years of service to the university. Our slide here shows Wheeler Hall, and we'll be talking a great deal about Wheeler in just a few minutes. But let me just say a word about myself. I was born in Shanghai, China in 1858, educated in England and at the University of Michigan, and came to California in 1889. I became professor of English, later chairman of the Department of English, and dean of the faculty. And in Wheeler Hall, there is a room named after me. While I was there, we're going to take another look now at our timeline just to bring us up to date as to where we are. And so we've moved up to pass the Constitutional Convention of 1878-79, and we've come to the first big game, which has started obviously an important California tradition. So take a look at what we're going to be covering in our next little segment here. So in 1895, Cal's track team went to the East Coast for a series of track meets. Now, this was the first time a California team had ever been outside the state. And they performed remarkably well. They won almost all their meets and just set the collegiate world on fire with their success. This little group from the far west, and you'd be interested to know that these fellows and their coach and manager, traveled about 7,000 miles by train because they worked their way back from Princeton through the Midwest, through the what would now be called the Big Ten, and into even Colorado. And the trip cost $223 a man, $223 for each of the 11 people. Quite an economical tour. Well, when the team got back to the campus, we were all of us were so excited by their success that we greeted them. And as they got off the train, now look behind the men in the top row in the black outfits. You see the bits of banner, and a banner, and each had a golden bear on it. And so they got off the train carrying these banners. And so the idea for a song came to me in a flash. And here is that song, and this is Berklee's first song, and is still an important part of the band's performance today. Some of the words to the song are very well known, starting out, "Oh, have you seen the heavens blue, when just seven stars are dancing through, right overhead a jovial crew, they're joining hands to make the air." But I also wrote some verses that most people have never heard, and some of them, I will say, maybe sound a little strange. Um, he might have been a wolverine, a tiger, or a badger bean, or yet some other beast I ween. He had his choice, and lo, a bear. He might have smiled on Michigan, or countenanced the Harvard man, or even gone Yalesian, but no, he's California's bear. Our totem takes us in his tow. He hugs our flag where'er we go. He makes it cold for every foe. He is their rigid, frigid polar bear. 'Twas he who froze the U of P and Princeton and Schenectady, and all the western galaxy. He hugged them tight, our golden bear, and on and on and on and on. So, mentioning in there the names of the schools that the track team defeated on its tour. Now, so let's move on to our next slide, because also in that period, in addition to the campus came about what is called the football statue that is on the western edge of the campus down near what is now the Life Science Building. This came about because of Cal beating Stanford in the big game in 1898 and 99. And there's a song that we like to celebrate for this, to commemorate this victory, and it's called Palms of Victory. That song is played and sung at the end of every game that Cal wins. Now, in the late 19th century, people began to realize that the campus didn't look very good. The buildings were a conglomeration, a haphazard collection of styles and formats, and that some people thought really need to do something to make the campus really look much more presentable and make it look like a real university. And so one of the 12 disciples that you met early on, the people who graduated in that first class in 1873, um, was able to convince Mrs. Phoebe Apperson Hearst uh, to sponsor an architectural competition to develop a plan for the university. And this slide and the next slide uh, show uh, that this was the result of the competition. An international competition was held, and a Frenchman was the winner. And some grand plans for what the campus would look like were were developed. And in our next slide, we can see uh, further up at the top on the left, we see another outline of what this plan was uh, destined to be. And so this plan was not followed exactly, but really became the basis for what we have today. Um, uh, the idea was to have what was called the Athens of the West, to convert this Western university into a real place of fame and style. So um, uh, Mrs. Hearst also supported all kinds of um, expeditions to gather anthropological items for the was become the Hearst Museum on the campus. Now, with the end of the 19th century, it became time for the university was looking for a new president. And they found someone in the East at Cornell, a man named Benjamin Ide Wheeler. And he had gotten his degree at Brown and then had gotten his PhD in Germany. And he taught and then he came back and taught at Cornell. And the regents were able to get him to agree to come to be president. But before he would come, he insisted that the regents agree that he would be the president in fact as in well as name. During much of the several decades before he came, there had been a series of presidents who this was often called the era of powerless presidents because the regents really ran the university. These were men who had made their fortunes in the gold rush or in the years after the gold rush, and they were in the habit of running things, and running things they did. And it was said that one of the early professors said of him that if he had had the administrative ability of Napoleon and Wellington, he still would have had the regents running the university, and that the president had to even get the regents' approval to have a chair varnished. So that's probably a little bit of an overstatement, but the Regents really ran the university. So anyway, Wheeler was able to get the Regents to agree to this, and he came to the campus as president. And this, in the upper left-hand corner, shows him uh, addressing the students. It was right, he was standing really near the flagpole there. The cadet corps was lined up, and the students were there. Now, on the slide, it says, the bottom slide shows, it says that this was October 25th, 1899. Well, the book from which this came was in error because this talk to the students was October 3rd. The 25th was his real formal inauguration on campus, but his talk to the students, and it's interesting that he talked to the students first. A very telling gesture. Um, Now here are some of the things that he said. His speech became known in future years as now it has been good to be here speech. And in this speech he said, "This university shall be a glorious old mother whose hearth you shall love to sit down. Love her. It does a man good to love noble things, to attach his life to noble allegiances. It is a good thing to love this church. It is a good thing to love the state. It is a good thing to love one's home. It is good to be loyal to one's father and mother. And after the same sort, it is good to be loyal to the University of California, which stands in life for the finest things and loftiest, highest ideals. To the University of California, then, love her. It will do your hearts good. Cheer for her. It will do your lungs good." So at the end of his speech, he said, "Now it has been good to be here. Let us meet often to consult and renew our enthusiasm together. And let us now go into our homes in peace." People at the time were taken back. This was really a new approach. The eras before, there had been a conflict between the president and the faculty and the students. And here was this man who said, "Let's meet often to consult and renew our enthusiasm." And this was really quite a remarkable um, change. Now, important things happened during Wheeler's long term. In our next slide, we're going to see what the campus looked like when Wheeler arrived. We see North Hall, South Hall, the library in front of where he gave his speech, and a couple of other buildings. That was what the campus looked like when Wheeler arrived. So one of the big features of his tenure was the growth of the campus. In our next slide, we're going to see what the campus looked like in 1920, just after he left. So you see the buildings that were created during his time. We see uh, California Hall, we see the library, we see Sather Gate, we see the Hearst Mining Building, the Greek Theater, Gilman Hall. So some really major improvements, and we also see at Wheeler Hall that was dedicated while he was still president. So the campus really grew during the period. One interesting fact is in 1906, the parts of the campus of the university that were in San Francisco, the medical facilities and things, were badly damaged by the earthquake and fire, and the university suffered a real loss. But the Berkeley campus was basically unfazed, and during those years, the campus grew greatly. Now, another great area of growth was in the student body, which went from about 2,000 when Wheeler arrived to about 7,000 by the time he left. Another factor in the growth period, or the growth scene, was the growth of the faculty in numbers and in reputation. Before Wheeler came, the campus had generally, when someone retired, replaced that person with a younger faculty member. But Wheeler broke that tradition and went out and was able to recruit from other institutions some leading scientists and teachers in various fields of knowledge and brought them to Berkeley. So as a result, the campus's the faculty growth in fame and numbers was an important factor. Another important area of growth was the importance of the university to the state of California and to the United States. Berkeley became well known nationally and internationally, and Wheeler was able to generate more funding from Sacramento, from the legislature. It was a time of renewed growth and development all around the campus. Now, let's look at our next slide. This shows President Wheeler and Mrs. Hearst in the Greek theater. She was a real important benefactress of the university. Beside her architectural plan, we'll see in a minute a picture of the Hearst Mining Building. We can go to that now next and see that picture of the Hearst Mining Building. The top scene shows it being dedicated, and the bottom scene shows it after it was renovated many years later. Mrs. Hearst dedicated this in memory of her late husband, George Hearst, who was a very, very successful miner and became a United States Senator from California. After he died, she inherited his money, and their only child was the infamous publisher William Randolph Hearst, who later gave the Greek theater to the university and a gymnasium in his mother's honor. Our next slide shows the future growth of the campus with the development of the Camp Neely. This is probably 1914 when this was being built. And then the bottom we see when it was renovated a number of years later. Mrs. Hearst became the first woman regent of the university, and as I said, was a benefactress of in all kinds of ways, scholarships for women students, a hall that was really a gym for women students. She would have the students to her home. She had anthropological exploring done all over the world. So she was really very, very important. Now, our next slide, we're going to see some student scenes during this period of time. And the first one is a football rally in the Greek theater. You can see the students packed in there. And the bottom left is what was called the custodian of the acts. And he guarded that very, very carefully. And we should go back and tell you how that came about. Back in 1899, just before Wheeler came to campus, Cal and Stanford were playing a baseball game in San Francisco. And Stanford had an axe that they were using to chop up blue and gold ribbons, trying to generate enthusiasm for their team. And of course, this was irritating the Cal fans. And Cal won the game and the series. And after the game, a group of Cal students grabbed the axe and took off with it. Now, I won't go through the whole story, but the chasing went on through San Francisco. The axe changed hands at least once. The handle was cut off and hidden under a coat. And as the guy carrying this Cal student with the axe um, got down to the ferry building, because there was only one way really to get back to the East Bay, and that was on the ferry, and everybody knew that. And so the Stanford people and some police were there looking for the axe. And the story goes that just as the Cal student carrying the axe got near the ferry building, he saw a woman that he had gone to high school with, and he convinced her to accompany him across the bay on the ferry. And so, as a couple, they were not suspected of being the culprits hiding the axe. And so they were able to get the axe back to Berkeley. And so, for many, many years, the axe was displayed on the campus, and here is that custodian carrying the axe. The next slide shows another rally scene. This is in you see there the class of 1915. These are the men of the class. Apparently, the rallies were very much segregated by class and gender, and they all have a sort of a cone kind of hat on their heads. And so this was a rally in those days. Now, I mentioned that the University of California became very well known nationally and internationally. In our next slide, we're going to see some evidence of that. Now, this, before we go talk about more about the importance nationally and internationally, I mentioned earlier that the freshmen and sophomores had a tradition of having this thing called the rush, where they tied each other up and so on and so forth. And I mentioned it was very, a lot of people got hurt badly because it was rough, and the faculty just couldn't stop it. But so finally, early in Wheeler's tenure, President Wheeler's tenure, he was able to get the classes, to freshmen and sophomores, to agree to stop the rush. And as a result, this big C was built up on the hill and became the campus symbol, really identifying a unified spirit for the campus. And here's a song that celebrates that big C. So that's the big C. Now, in our next couple of slides, we're going to see examples of the importance um, of student life, and then we'll see something about some important visitors to campus. Every year at the graduation time, the seniors held what was called a senior pilgrimage. And there you see the men in their white trousers and blue jackets and hats, and the women in their white outfits and their parasols. And in the background, the bottom picture, you see the library, the main library, uh, under under construction. Again, this class structure was very, very important. So let's go on now to our next slide. Oh, before we go in, here is uh, Professor Willie on the left, the white hair. So I thought it was interesting to see him. He was Wheeler. This is during Wheeler's term into the beginning of the 20th century, and so here is Willie still showing his attachment to the university right from its earliest days. So he really deserves a lot of credit for his long, long years of service. Okay, let's go on to our next slide. And here is one of our important early visitors. This in the middle of the three is President Teddy Roosevelt with President Wheeler at a military review on campus. And then we see Wheeler, or we see Teddy Roosevelt speaking in the Greek theater with Mrs. Hearst there on the left. This was one of several times that Roosevelt was a visitor on the campus. In our next slide, we're going to see another president, Woodrow Wilson. Now, the interesting thing about this picture is that this is in April of 1919. And as it says, just after Wilson's return from the Versailles Conference at the end of World War I. Now, Wilson was on a nationwide train tour trying to promote support for the Treaty of Versailles, and particularly for the League of Nations that he had advocated for so many years. Now, several days later, on his way back to Washington, he began to feel ill. And after he got back to Washington, he suffered a debilitating stroke that really left him an invalid the rest of his life. The bottom picture shows me, Professor Gailey, with Mrs. Wilson. And interestingly enough, many people call her the first woman president in the United States because while her husband was ill, she wouldn't let anyone near him, and essentially ran the president's office by herself. And so there again, you see me with Mrs. Wilson. So I am now. Well, let me say one more thing before I turn you over to our next tour leader. During World War I, the campus turned itself over to the work of the military. An aeronautical school was on the campus, and in our next slide, we'll see a picture of a ROT. Well, okay. Let me hit this one first, and then we'll go on to the next one. There we go. That's the one that shows the military, the ROTC, Cal ROTC, and at the bottom we see the aeronautical campus there, the training for people going into the air part of the Army, and the service flag on the Campanile. Okay, so uh, the picture we showed with the picture of a tree, this illustrates one of the other important things that happened during Wheeler's administration, that the university became statewide. The Davis became the farm at Davis was started. The agricultural experiment station at Riverside, and this picture shows men in a citrus tree, uh, illustrating the important work done. And the university also began the Scripps Institute of Oceanography in La Jolla that later grew into the University of California, San Diego, just like the Citrus Experiment Station uh, grew into the University of California, Riverside. One of the things that happened during at the end of World War I was a flu epidemic hit the world, a pandemic. And in our next slide, we see the picture of one of the women on campus dressed in with a mask. The flu was a worldwide tragedy. Many hundreds of thousands died. Um, some 25 students died. A faculty member died, uh, and the people in the military suffered greatly because that particular age group was badly affected um, the flu. California Memorial Stadium was dedicated in 1923 as a memorial to Californians lost in the war. And just outside the Campanile, the front door to the Campanile, there's a bench with two bears on it called the Mourning Bears. Again, a gift symbolizing the loss of life suffered by Californians during that first awful World War. Well, I'm going to say goodbye to you now and turn you over to someone who came as a result of President Wheeler's tenure. So goodbye and good luck. So I'm going to show you a cartoon picture of myself. My name is um, Henry Morse Stevens, professor of history. Now, while I was a little overweight and a little shorter than average, I certainly, this is a cartoon view of me. But I'm glad that you can see it and we can all laugh together. I was from an Anglo-Indian family. I went to Oxford and got my degree, and then came to the United States and taught at Cornell, where I knew Benjamin Knight Wheeler. And he later brought me to California, and I taught there, taught European history for many years. I also became the chairman of the history department and had um, faculty meetings in my room in the faculty club. And in a minute, we'll see that faculty club. But I want to show you that our next slide is the dedication of, of Henry Morse Stevens Hall on the campus. Getting a little bit ahead of myself, but the building was dedicated after my death and was funded by the associated students and also through public subscriptions, because I was very gratified to have many friends within people who had attended Berkeley, and that building shows what they thought of me. The next slide is going to show uh, the room inside the building. This is called the Memorial Room, and there's my picture over the fireplace in the room. A much more kindly picture to me. Now, we're going to walk up the street now uh, from Stevens Hall. We're going to walk east along the road, and we're going to come to the class of 1910 gate. This gate over just next to Strawberry Creek was funded by the class of 1910, and the inscription on it says the class of 1910 uh, set this gate so that we would not be forgotten with the passage of time. And it's unfortunate that you can't see, but at the upper part of the gate, those words are inscribed in Latin. And, and if you ever walk through that gate, you want to look up at the upper left-hand corner of the first word, because you can see where there was a correction made, because originally one of the letters, one of the Latin letters was incorrect and was changed. And this was another example of Mrs. Hearst, because Mrs. Hearst helped contribute to the building of the gate. Now let's go through the gate and down the steps and over to the faculty club. And this is the north side of the faculty club, and this is where I lived while I was on the faculty there. I lived up in the upper part of the club, and this is where I had my faculty meetings and so on and so forth. And I also used to, Rudyard Kipling was one of my favorites, and I used to recite his poetry out the window at night. And some of the words, God, Lord God, be with us yet, lest we forget, lest we forget. So it was said that students on their way from the library and things to their houses could hear me recite that at night. After I passed, my state gave a large collection of Kipling's work and the works of Omar Khayyam to the library. And I was very instrumental in the University of California acquiring the Bancroft collection that became the Bancroft Library on campus. Now, I died in 1919. I had gone over to San Francisco to attend the funeral of Mrs. Hearst in Grace Cathedral that was still not finished. And on the way back, I had suffered a heart attack and died, and my funeral was held in Faculty Glade on the campus. So I'm going to say goodbye to you now and turn you back over to your original tour guide for the home stretch down the length of Faculty Glade and to Sather Gate. So goodbye and good luck. All right, our next slide after we have left Professor Stevens shows a sculpture in the faculty club, the Last Dryad. Now this statue was created by the middle of a three-generation group of sculptors by the name of Calder, and the youngest Calder was quite famous for his mobiles. Anyway, this statue was created in New York, and when it was first introduced, it was quickly pulled off display because it was said that the woman woman who looked like in the subject of the sculpture said that her husband, this sculpture, caused friction between her and her husband. And so as a result of a threat of a lawsuit, the sculpture was withdrawn. And for many years, it was in the in Hearst, in the Hearst Gymnasium for women. had gotten here through the auspices of Margaret Calder Hayes of the class of 17. And in later years, it was moved out onto Faculty Glade, and there it stands today. We're going to now move just a few steps down the glade, and we're going to come to the sculpture of Pappy Waldorf, the famous Cal football coach who took the Bears to the Rose Bowl 3 straight years, 49, 50, and 51. And greatly beloved by his players, and they subscribed for this statue. Now, I'm going to have you listen to a few words from Pappy as he tries to address students at the big game rally.
There is no other. There is no other game like. There's no other game like the big game. And there's no student body like the California students. Tomorrow will be the 57th big game. The series is tied 23-all, with 10 games which have ended in a tie. In all the long history of this great traditional game, California has never led in the series at any time until now.
So that was Pappy at a big game rally. Now, a few steps from the Pappy statue is a grove called the Arlie and Ruthie Williams Grove. It was dedicated in memory of Arlie and Ruthie Williams. Arlie was class president at Cal in 1934 and an All-American football player and also a baseball player. Later, he became, after service in the Navy and then at College of Marin, he became Dean of Men at Berkeley. And during the troubles years in the 1960s, he was the university's point man in dealing with the unrest. And even the people that he had to discipline respected and admired him very much for his fairness and his compassion. His wife, Ruthie, was the class of 35. She was active in all kinds of endeavors to make life on the campus better for students. The Arlie and Ruthie Williams Grove. Just right next door to that is the Brutus Hamilton Grove of redwood trees. Brutus Hamilton was a renowned athlete at the University of Missouri, and was an Olympic athlete, and then came to California as track coach in 1932 and served out his whole career here. He was also director of athletics. And he used to come down to Sproul Hall to serve as an assistant dean of students. And as he did, he always fed the squirrels and the birds on his walk down to the campus. And he would even feed them out of his hand. He was somebody beloved by everybody who knew him. During World War II, as an officer in the Air Force, he wrote to people back in the States, urging them to send popcorn to the flyers in Europe who were in such terrible danger during the war. Okay, now we're going to walk just a few more steps down the hill, and we're going to come to the Pelican building. Pelican was the name of a campus humor magazine that was founded in 1903 by a man named Earl C. Anthony, who later became the owner of radio station KFI and a large Packard automobile dealership in Los Angeles. And the next slide is going to show you the cover of the first edition of the Pelican in April of 1903. Now, Pelican, the name Pelican, apparently it was a derisive name for some co-eds at the time who were considered overly serious. So that's the origin of the name, the Pelican. Now, when the building was dedicated in 1955, Earl C. Anthony wanted to have quite an event. He wanted the building outlined in neon lights, and he wanted showgirls to be there with a flock of pelicans. And the campus did its best and was able to talk him out of that. But there was a live pelican tied by the leg at the dedication ceremony of Pelican. All right, we're going to walk down a few more steps for our last stop. This shows the picture of Robert Gordon Sproul, a class of 1913, who later went through the ranks of the business side of the university and became the president for 28 years. Sproul Hall, the administration building, named after him. He worked hard to maintain the concept of one university because there were threats and try to separate the university into a southern branch of the university and a separate university in the north. And he held fast to the idea of one university. He guided the university through World War II and the very divisively loyalty oath in the early 1950s. He had a remarkable voice. I'll let you hear in just a minute. The story goes that one time someone in his office heard him talking in a loud voice, and they said, "Who's President Sproul talking to?" And someone else said, "He's talking to Sacramento about the budget." And the person said, "Well, why doesn't he use the telephone?" So you can see when you hear his voice why he often was thought of as not having to use a telephone.
And then, 87 years ago, on this day, March 23rd, in the year 1868, the university in whose name we meet this afternoon received its charter from the state of California. The authority for its establishment was an act of the state legislature, signed by Governor Henry H. State, which ordained a university that should, and I quote, have for its design to provide instruction and complete education in all departments of science, literature, art, industrial and professional pursuits, and general education.
So Sproul's words there bring us back to the founding of the university and to the end of our tour. I want to thank again Mark Maffio for his work on this, and I want to give you my email address, and if any of you would like to be in contact with me, I would welcome it. So my email address is P, V as in Victor, A as in Apple, N as in lemon, we start over again. PVANHCAL@att.net. I again thank you for attending. I, the third time, thank Mark and wish you all a hearty Go Bears.